Okay, good. So assume we have a class, let's say a class point, public. No, actually, let's not make it public because we don't need it public. We can just make a class without any access modifier. So class point, and we want a point to have two instance variables, two fields. Let's call them x and y. So just x and y, both of type int. And that's all we do here. So if define a class, and now we're going to make an object of that class. For that, we will have to call the constructor. We'll have to use new and say point. This will make a point object. So if we look at this in the memory of our running program, if we execute that line, then we actually get something we could visualize with this picture. So we get an object that is being created by saying new, and that object has a type, it's namely a point, and it is structured inside. It has something for all the fields, right? We have the two instance variables, so we actually have two locations of memory that are inside this object, two instance variables or fields, x and y, and they both have a type, and you'll write the type here above it. So both of them are integer numbers. So in those boxes and those rectangles will go the value of those variables. So this is what happens when we execute this code. So we say new point, we get this specific object. So just to repeat, those two things are instance variables, and it's plural because we have two, and they are reflected in our diagram over here and over here. So those two are our two instance variables. The instance variables have a type here. Type of those two guys is int, and we see the same thing here. We have the type of those variables, and they have a name x and y. We see the name x and y. And now when we call the constructor, so this guy here is called a constructor, invocation, so we're calling a constructor. Actually, this new point is an expression, it has two pieces. New says we need to make an object, so we allocate. And the second thing is we're calling the constructor to initialize it, so we initialize. So by saying point, we say two things. We say, what object do we want to create? We want to create a point, so this is the class of the object, a point. And we also say we want to invoke the constructor, so we pass in these arguments. Now you may say that if you look at this class, at the source code, there is no constructor. And this is in fact true, so maybe we want to create a constructor. So let's put the constructor there and say point open close like this. Now we have our class, we have a constructor, but whether or not we have that constructor doesn't really make a difference. So this guy here is our constructor, and it's constructing the object. In fact, inside we have the code that initializes the variables. Right now we don't do anything, and for this reason the variables are on their default values. So a variable of type int, if I don't set it to anything and it's an instance variable like those two boxes, then the variable will be initialized and the object is allocated automatically set to 0. So both of those variables are initialized to 0. Now we could have a constructor which initializes them, so we could actually say let's do the initialization in here explicitly, and then we would say, let's say x equals 5 and y equals 3. Okay, so we've assigned values. Now if you actually execute that code, it's not going to be like that, it's going to be a bit different. So this would be set to the corresponding value. So x would be 5 and y would be 3. Okay. Now when we're calling a constructor, we can also say, well, every time we call this constructor, we make an object and it's always starting out with x is 5 and y is 3. That's a bit too fixed. I mean, we want to have a way to create an object that has a different x value, a different y value. So we can have a different constructor. So we can modify, for example, our constructor. Let's say, make some space here. And we provide arguments. So we provide command line arguments, constructor arguments here. Let's say int the horizontal coordinate and int the vertical coordinate, like this. So this is still the constructor. Still the constructor here. And now we can't invoke it like that anymore, so this is not going to work down here. We need to actually provide actual arguments here. So this will be done by saying, what would you like to pass? I'd like to pass 4 and 2. Now the thing is that the way we call it, we pass those values, but we're not going to use them because x is set to 5 always, no matter what h and v are. So we need to actually say, no, we want to set x to something else, for example to h, and you want to set v to something else, for example y set to v. Now this works. So if I call it, we'll get that set to 4 and that set to 2. Okay, so that is how we draw stack and heap diagrams when we construct an object.